I think what I remember most about films is the people that I've worked with rather than the film itself.
At 80 years old, Sam Elliott finally cracked that steely cowboy calm. Known for his gravelly voice and no BS attitude, he's now naming the 7 actors he just couldn't stand sharing the screen with, calling one a diva in boots and another all ego, no talent. After a lifetime in Hollywood, he's laying it all bare, and it's more brutal than a barroom brawl. Ready for the names? Let's get into it. Nicolas Cage. Sam Elliott has always held fast to one principle: less is more. In his world, great acting is a quiet storm, controlled, deliberate, and rooted in truth. A pause can carry the weight of a lifetime. A single look can unravel a man's soul. Raised on hard-earned wisdom and the grounded elegance of classic cinema, Elliott reveres subtlety. To him, the loudest voice in the room isn't strength, it's insecurity. Emotion should burn slow, not detonate. So when Nicolas Cage burst onto the scene with his chaotic brilliance, his feral eyes, volcanic outbursts, and razor-edged unpredictability, Elliott didn't see a revelation. He saw noise. While Cage racked up awards, captivated critics, and built a cult-like following, Elliott stayed unmoved. To him, those performances didn't feel lived in. They felt staged. Not layered, but loud. Not truthful, but theatrical. Ghost Rider brought the 2 actors together on screen, but not in spirit. Elliott delivered his role with the same steady-weathered gravitas that defined his career, but off-camera he kept his distance. Always courteous, always professional, but unmistakably detached. Later, Elliott would speak in general terms about actors who hijack scenes with ego, those who warp the narrative to fit their own theatrics, rather than disappearing into the role. And according to those close to him, there was no ambiguity about who he had in mind. More firework than flame, he once reportedly said of Cage. A short phrase, but it spoke volume. An elegant jab at spectacle winning out over soul. To Elliott, Cage represented a kind of acting that prized chaos over clarity, performance over presence. Where Elliott found power in stillness, the kind that draws the audience in, makes them listen for what's not said, Cage exploded outward, all heat and no anchor. To Elliott, it wasn't bravery, it was bluster. No matter how many awards Cage racked up, how loudly directors praised his fearlessness, or how fiercely fans defended his unpredictability, Elliott never wavered. He didn't see transformation, he saw decline. The quiet, slow-burning craft he cherished was being drowned out by spectacle, and to him, that wasn't progress. It was loss. This wasn't about bitterness or rivalry. Elliott was never one to compete for the spotlight. What he held onto was a personal code, one forged in integrity, patience, and deep respect for the quiet moments most actors rush past. For Elliott, acting was never about commanding attention. It was about vanishing into the truth of the character. So when Nicolas Cage came crashing in with his operatic flair and eccentric choices, it wasn't just a stylistic clash. It felt to Elliott like a betrayal of what acting is supposed to be. Jane Campion. In 2022, the ripple effects of Sam Elliott's searing critique of The Power of the Dog finally reached a boiling point, and director Jane Campion didn't hold back. While accepting the top honor at the Directors Guild of America Awards, Campion took the stage and delivered a verbal counterpunch that stunned the room. Referring to Elliott as a little bit of a, she let the insult hang in the air. Sharp, deliberate, and delivered with the same cutting precision Elliott himself was known for in his most biting on-screen role. It wasn't just a clapback, it was a declaration. Campion had heard the shot, and she wasn't afraid to return fire. It wasn't just a casual dig, it was a full-throated rebuttal to what Jane Campion saw as an outdated, sexist, and narrow-minded attack. Not just on her film, but on her craft, and more personally, on her right to tell a Western story. The feud had ignited when Elliott, speaking candidly on a podcast, tore into The Power of the Dog with uncharacteristic bluntness. He mocked the film's lead performance, took aim at Benedict Cumberbatch's portrayal of a cowboy, and scoffed at the film's grasp of the American West. But what many found especially pointed was Elliott's criticism of Campion herself. To him, the idea that a filmmaker from New Zealand could authentically explore the inner lives of cowboys was laughable, a notion that to Campion and many others reeked of gatekeeping and chauvinism masquerading as purism. It wasn't just about geography. For Elliott, it was about legitimacy. He didn't see The Power of the Dog as as a daring reinvention of the Western. He saw it as a stylized outsider's take, technically polished, but missing the raw, lived-in truth he believed the genre demanded. But Jane Campion, known for her razor-sharp intellect and unflinching artistic voice, wasn't about to let that kind of dismissal stand. Taking the podium at the DGA Awards, she fired back with precision. "He's not a cowboy," she said, deadpan. "He's an actor." The line hit like a thunderclap, not just because it was aimed at a revered figure, but because it directly challenged the very identity Elliott had built his career on. In one sentence, Campion didn't just respond, she redefined the conversation, poking a hole in the mythos of a man who had long stood as Hollywood's living embodiment of the West. To many, it felt like a public reckoning, a clash between old Hollywood values and a new wave of inclusive, genre-defying storytelling. Campion wasn't just defending her film, she was confronting a deeper resistance to change, and she didn't stop at questioning Elliott's authority. She went further, accusing his remarks of being sexist. She called out what she saw as a clear discomfort with the film's exploration of repressed masculinity, vulnerability, and emotional nuance, especially under the direction of a woman. For Campion, Elliott's critique wasn't really about cinematic craft. It was about control, about who gets to tell Western stories, who defines authenticity, and who's allowed to push the boundaries of a genre long dominated by a single perspective. In Campion's view, it was a clear attempt to gatekeep, a way of policing a genre long defined by male voices and perspectives. The fallout was swift and headline-worthy, sparking debate across the industry. But while Campion's rebuke echoed loudly, Sam Elliott remained silent. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't walk back his word. According to insiders, he was unfazed, unapologetic. His principles, as always, held firm, even if it meant losing favor in the more progressive circles of Hollywood. For Elliott, it was never about playing the game. It was about standing by a code, even when it no longer matched the times. The rift between Elliott and the Power of the Dog's creative team wasn't just a disagreement. It was a philosophical divide, a line in the sand. It revealed something deeper about Elliott's worldview. His anger doesn't discriminate. It's not reserved for actors who chase spectacle or roles he deems inauthentic. He's just as willing to butt heads with direct, no matter how acclaimed, if he believes they've betrayed the essence of the Western. Benedict Cumberbatch. The backlash came fast, and it hit hard. Critics and film scholars slammed Elliott for gatekeeping the genre, accusing him of clinging to an outdated vision of masculinity that The Power of the Dog intentionally set out to challenge. To many, it wasn't just criticism, it was resistance. Resistance to a new wave of storytelling that dares to reimagine the Western, trading in the old stoic, hyper-masculine archetypes for something more complex, vulnerable, and inclusive. But Sam Elliott didn't flinch. There was no half-hearted apology, no carefully crafted PR walkback. He stood his ground, firm, unshaken. To him, this wasn't just about artistic license, it was about respect for the land, the legacy, and the real men who lived the life Hollywood so often romanticizes. He believed the film got the West all wrong. It leaned into the look, the sweeping landscapes, the vintage saddles, but missed the heart of it. The grit, the stillness, the brutal, unspoken truths of that life. And worse, in Elliott's eyes, it didn't just misunderstand the cowboy, it disrespected him. It took a symbol of rugged, flawed humanity and turned him into something fragile, distant, and unfamiliar. Though Benedict Cumberbatch never responded publicly, insiders later revealed he was deeply rattled by the remark. He had poured himself into the role, learning ranch work, adopting the lifestyle, and staying in character even off camera. But for Elliott, no amount of method acting could bridge what he saw as a fundamental cultural disconnect. To this day, Sam Elliott hasn't wavered. In his eyes, the West isn't up for reinterpretation. It's something you live, not perform. It's not a costume, a clever lighting setup, or a vehicle for Oscar buzz. It's a way of life, shaped by solitude, forged in hardship, and bound by codes you don't speak, you just know. And to Sam Elliott, The Power of the Dog broke those rules, not out of malice perhaps, but out of ignorance. And in his world, that was enough. Enough to speak up, enough to strip the varnish off Hollywood's glossy tribute. Because for Elliott, silence in the face of that kind of misunderstanding wasn't an option. It was a betrayal. Kevin Costner. To Sam Elliott, acting should reflect lived experience. It should carry the dust, silence, and stillness of real life, especially when it comes to the Western. Elliott built his career on authenticity, not just playing cowboys, but living like one. Raised in the rhythms of the American West, he brought something to the screen that no camera trick or dialogue tweak could manufacture: truth. Kevin Costner, by contrast, never fully convinced him. From Wyatt Earp to Yellowstone, Costner embraced the Western mold, but to Elliott it always felt like performance. not presence. Clean boots, clean lines, a rancher in silhouette but not in soul. He didn't see grit, he saw gloss. He plays a cowboy like it's dress up, Elliott allegedly told a friend, like he read about it in a magazine, then showed up to set. That line, while never said in public, spread quietly through industry circles and stuck because it captured Elliott's deepest frustration with modern Western. They had become costume drama. The hardships were simulated, the silences scripted. With Yellowstone, Costner became a modern Western icon. Audiences loved the drama, the family power plays, the breathtaking landscape. But Elliott didn't buy the myth. To him, it wasn't a Western. It was a high-gloss soap opera in cowboy boot. The show might have had the horses and hats, but it lacked the marrow. And Sam Elliott wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Rumor has it, Elliott was once offered a cameo on Yellowstone, a respectful nod to a genre legend. He turned it down flat. No hesitation, not out of spite, but out of principle. A soap opera with a cowboy hat, he reportedly called it. Elliott never made it personal. He didn't trash Costner in interviews or start a feud, but the distance was there, and unmistakable. Because for Elliott, it wasn't about fame or fan bases, it was about truth. And when something didn't feel true, he walked away. Kevin Costner may have the spotlight, but Sam Elliott holds the line, quietly, firmly, with boots that carry the weight of 100 real stories, and none of the polish. Jared Leto. If there's one thing that grates on Sam Elliott more than anything else, it's pretension. Not arrogance in the loud, obvious sense, but the kind dressed up as art. The kind that masks attention-seeking as commitment, that wraps theatrics in a veil of method. To Elliott, acting is a sacred craft, one built on humility, discipline, and truth. It's not about turning heads, it's about disappearing into the role. And to him, Jared Leto was the embodiment of everything acting shouldn't be. So when Jared Leto began grabbing headlines for his extreme method acting, sending dead rats to co-stars on Suicide Squad, staying in character around the clock, and blurring the line between performance and persona, Sam Elliott wasn't impressed. He didn't see a committed artist, he saw a showman chasing the spotlight. He's acting like acting is a carnival, Elliott reportedly told a longtime friend, rolling his eyes at what he saw as performance art spiraling into self-indulgence. To Elliott, there was nothing noble about stunts masquerading as dedication. In his world, craft wasn't supposed to spill outside the frame. It wasn't about spectacle, it was about stillness. Truth. You didn't need to torment your castmates or live inside your character to deliver something great. You just had to understand the story and disappear into it without making the process louder than the performance. Though Elliott and Leto have never shared a screen, industry insiders say their paths came close to crossing. Elliott had been loosely attached to a project, one rooted in quiet drama and character work, until the studio pivoted, reshaping the film around Jared Leto's casting. The moment Elliott caught wind of the shift, he quietly bowed out. No statement, no complaints, no headlines, just silence. For those who know him, that said everything. That silence was Elliott's statement. For a man who views acting as sacred ground, sharing the screen with someone he believed cheapened, the craft simply wasn't an option. Those close to Elliott are quick to dismiss any notion of jealousy or generational resentment. This wasn't about age or fame, it was about values. At its core, it was a clash between two entirely different philosophies, one rooted in humility, stillness, and truth, the other in spectacle, noise, and self-display. And for Elliott, that line was never negotiable. Elliott believes the best acting never begs to be noticed. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It's found in the heavy pause before a word, the flicker of emotion behind the eyes, the kind of presence that speaks volumes without a single flourish. No props, no theatrics, just truth, quietly delivered. Leto's approach, by contrast, struck Elliott as something entirely different. To him, it felt like acting for attention's sake, a spectacle where the role took a backseat to the buzz. The performance wasn't just on screen, it bled into headlines, press tours, and behind-the-scenes lore. And in Elliott's eyes, when the narrative around the role becomes louder than the story itself, the craft has already been lost. Jared Leto, with his Oscar and devoted cult following, may hold respect in certain corners of Hollywood, but in Sam Elliott's world, he stands as a symbol of everything the industry has let slip away: humility, restraint, and the quiet dignity of simply doing the work. To Elliott, acting was never about transformation at any cost. It wasn't about making noise or chasing shock, it was about telling the truth, plainly and powerfully. No gimmicks, no self-mythologizing. Just the story, the character, and the quiet commitment to honoring both. To Elliott, Jared Leto is the poster child of a modern era fixated on performance over purpose, on shock value over substance. It's not personal, it's principled, and that's why Elliott keeps his distance. Not out of spite, but out of reverence for the craft he spent a lifetime protecting. In an industry where louder too often means better, Sam Elliott stands firm, committed to the quiet power of discipline, to the weight of understatement, and to walking away from anything that dares to betray it. Ashton Kutcher. To Sam Elliott, acting has never been about fame, followers, or feeding the algorithm. It's a craft, something sacred earned through years of work and carried with quiet dignity. He comes from the old school where every word counts, where performances are rooted in live truth, not polished by media training. So when Ashton Kutcher, fresh off sitcom fame, romantic comedies, and Silicon Valley ventures, was cast alongside Elliott in Netflix's The Ranch, it wasn't a clash of egos. It was a collision of worlds. From the beginning, Elliott kept it professional, respectful, but beneath the surface, the divide was unmistakable. He showed up to set each day, delivered his lines with the same weathered gravitas that had defined his career, and kept a measured, professional distance. But according to several crew members, the tension was palpable. Not loud or explosive, but simmering just beneath the surface. Elliott wasn't the kind to rant or throw fits. His disapproval came in quieter forms, a slow shake of the head, a narrowed look, or a muttered line under his breath that cut deeper than any outburst. One insider recalled overhearing him say, "He's a decent guy, but no real actor." It wasn't said with venom. It was said with finality. To Elliott, that was just the truth. Kutcher, despite his charm and easy charisma, embodied something Elliott had come to distrust in the modern industry, a Hollywood that valued polish over presence, likability over depth. While Elliott had spent decades grinding, taking bit parts, playing hardened men in the margins, earning respect one slow mile at a time, Kutcher had catapulted to stardom with sitcom zingers, tabloid fame, and algorithm-friendly appeal. And to Elliott, that wasn't just a difference in path, it was a difference in purpose. Publicly, Ashton Kutcher was nothing but gracious. He called Elliott a mentor, praised his gravitas, and often spoke about how lucky he felt to share the screen with a living legend. But behind the scenes, Elliott remained unmoved. Respectful, yes, but unconvinced. "He's acting like a guy who saw acting on YouTube," Elliott reportedly said in a private moment. To him, it wasn't enough to memorize lines or hit marks. You had to live the role, understand its weight, its contradictions, its humanity. Kutcher's light-hearted charm, while easy on audiences, lacked the depth Elliott believed real storytelling demanded. Still, Elliott never let that disappointment bleed onto the set. He didn't undercut scenes, shun conversations, or try to outshine his co-star. He kept it professional. Because for Sam Elliott, showing up with integrity mattered more than proving a point. His resistance wasn't rooted in ego. It was rooted in standards. For Elliott, it was about protecting the integrity of a craft that had shaped his life, even as the industry around him leaned further into trends, algorithms, and flash. He saw himself as a final sentinel, standing guard over the old code of discipline, depth, and authenticity. To Sam Elliott, acting wasn't a platform or a popularity contest. It was sacred ground. And while he might quietly shake his head at the spectacle of modern stardom, he'd never cross the line himself. Not for ratings, not for relevance, not for anyone or anything. Because the code that raised him, the one built on truth, humility, and hard-earned respect, is the same one he'll carry to the end. Jeff Bridges. Even there, in what many assumed was mutual admiration between two weathered icons of the genre, tension quietly brewed. Because for Sam Elliott, it's not enough to wear the hat. You have to earn it. There was a time when Sam Elliott and Jeff Bridges felt like two sides of the same weathered coin, both grounded, both soulful, both possessing that rare, unspoken gravitas that made every word they uttered on screen feel like scripture. When they shared the screen in The Big Lebowski, the chemistry was effortless. Elliott's sage-like narrator and Bridges' iconic dude existed in perfect balance. One rough-hewn and timeless, the other disheveled and drifting, but somehow kindred. To fans, it felt like the meeting of two legends cut from the same cloth. But over time, that cloth began to fray. Elliott's deep, deliberate cadence as the stranger played like a perfect counterweight to Bridges' easygoing drift as the dude. On screen, they were magnetic. Off-screen, the admiration felt genuine. Two men cut from the same rugged fabric, stoic, grounded, and shaped more by grit than by glitter. But something shifted in the years that followed. Subtle at first, then more pronounced. The turning point, many believe, came with Bridges' Oscar win for Crazy Heart in 2010. The award was well earned. His portrayal of a faded, booze-soaked country singer was raw, haunting, and achingly human. Hollywood celebrated the performance as a triumph of vulnerability. Elliott, however, didn't see it the same way. Those close to Sam Elliott say that moment marked the beginning of a slow, quiet fracture. Jeff became harder to reach. One insider put it plainly. He didn't change overnight, but there was a new layer to him. More curated, more polished, less grounded. To Elliott, the shift wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. He'd built his entire career on the belief that success should never change who you are. Fame wasn't the goal. It was a byproduct, not a compass. So when he watched Jeff Bridges begin to float in more elite circles, deliver glossier interviews, and speak with the practiced tone of someone fully aware of their Hollywood stature, Elliott didn't feel envy. He felt disappointment. In his eyes, he hadn't just lost a collaborator. He'd lost a kindred spirit, someone he once believed stood shoulder to shoulder with him in quiet rebellion against the very machine that now seemed to embrace him. In a later interview, Elliott offered a cryptic but telling remark, "Some folks change, others just show who they always were." It was classic Elliott, sparse in words, heavy in meaning. Fans and insiders didn't need much to read between the lines. To many, it felt like a quiet, pointed reflection on Jeff Bridges. Not cruel, not bitter, just honest, laced with the kind of subtle disappointment Elliott rarely voiced but never faked. And after that, the silence between the two only deepened. No feuds, no headlines, just a once shared bond fading into something distant, unspoken and unresolved. They stopped showing up to each other's premieres. The mutual support that once flowed so naturally, quiet nods, shared smiles, a word of praise in interviews, simply disappeared. No joint appearances, no acknowledgement, just a steady, widening gap. Neither man ever spoke ill of the other in public. There were no harsh words, no dramatic riff, but the absence said everything. For Elliott, the pain wasn't rooted in betrayal. It was in the drift, the slow, silent ache of watching someone he once called a brother slip away. Not because of malice, but because of change. And that kind of loss cuts deeper than any feud. It's not something you argue about. It's something you grieve. In Elliott's eyes, the bond they shared was forged in honesty, a quiet, mutual understanding of what it meant to be men of principle in an industry built on illusion. There was no need for grand declarations or constant affirmation. It was just there, solid, unshakable. But when that honesty began to fade, so did the bond. Not in a flash, but in the slow erosion of what once felt unbreakable. And for a man like Sam Elliott, who treats loyalty as sacred, that silence said more than any argument ever could. It wasn't anger, it was loss, pure and simple. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Do you think Sam Elliott was right to speak out, or did he take it too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're into untold stories, iconic feuds, and behind-the-scenes truths, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.